All right, we are talking about exponents today. So first we're just going to review some vocabulary and what exponents mean, and then we'll get into some details. So we have 2 to the 4th power. That's how you would say this. And there's 2 pieces. The 2 is the base, and the 4 is the exponent. Did I give him a copy of this?
Yes.
Okay.
I cut it up.
Okay, good. So, the base is a number that's repeatedly multiplied. So what 2 to the 4th means is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And this is called expanded form. Yeah, it's just you took it and you wrote it out. And I use expanded form in algebra sometimes to explain some of the rules you get into later on in high school, but it's just good to know what that is. And then if I actually do what it says, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. And so this is what we get over here. So I'm going to give you some words here. If they say evaluate, they're wanting this, which is called the answer, the solution. There's lots of different words that mean the same thing, which drives teachers and students insane. But this is the difference. If they want you to write it out in expanded form or ask you what it means, this is what they're looking for. If they ask you to evaluate or they ask for the answer or solution, this is what they want. So we're going to do a little bit of both. Okay, so just to run through some basic examples, I'll pause for a second and let everybody write. I actually put some words in here that takes longer to write than numbers. We good? So if I have 5 squared, what's my expanded form?
5.
5 times 5, very good. And then 5 times 5 is?
25.
25, good. So when we pronounce what this says, there's a couple of vocabulary things. I can say 5 to the 2nd, or you could say the 2nd power. Or if it's a 2, there's a special term. You can say 5 squared. So there's 2 ways you can say that. I can say 5 to the 2nd power or to the 2nd. Or I could say 5 squared. So squared is a special word that only goes with the 2nd power. All right? Give you guys a second to write. And then we'll look at the next one. So 4 to the 3rd, what's the expanded form? Go for it. 4 times 4 times 4. And then the answer I have to think about. So I have to do 4 times 4 is 16 and then times another 4. And if I don't know that, I'm going to have to write that out really quick. So 6 times 4 is 24. 1 times 4 is 4 plus 2 is 64. So there's my answer or solution. We evaluated it. And there's a couple of ways that you could read this original problem. I could say 4 to the 3rd or to the 3rd power. Putting the word power is kind of optional, depends on who's saying it. And if it's the 3rd power, there's a special term. You could say 4 cubed. So squared and cubed are special. Squared goes with the 2nd power, cubed goes with 3rd power. Those are the only ones that have special terminology, just to make sure that we know that. And then we'll just do one that doesn't have special terminology. And we'll go through just some vocabulary. Most of this is just making sure we have the vocabulary down and we remember what exponents are. So if I'm doing 7 to the 4th, that would be 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. And if I'm trying to figure this out, it's going to take me a minute. So here's what I would do, because 7s are kind of hard to work with. I'd probably multiply these and get 49 and these and get 49. If I had to do this by hand, I would then just do 49 times 49 over here. If you have a calculator, it's a little easier, but
it's 2,400.
So 2,401. So if you have a calculator, that's easy. If you didn't, this is the math I would do, and I'll just do it really quick. 9 times 9 is 81. Carry the 8. 4 times 9 is 36. Plus 8 is 44. Magic 0. Get rid of that 8 for a second. 4 times 9 is 36. Put the 6 down. Carry the 3. 16 plus 3 is 19. When you add it all up, you get 2,401. Yes. So you can do them by hand. So you guys know how to do long multiplication. The good news is most of the time, if you're expected to do these on any kind of assessment, they'll usually give you a calculator tool to do that. Normally, they won't make you do all of that by hand, which is nice. I can't say it won't ever happen, but probably won't happen. Okay, so this one, there's only one way to pronounce. I would just say 7 to the 4th, and then sometimes they'll say 4th power. So I'll put power in parentheses. There's no special term for 4th power or 5th power or 6th power. Squared and cubed are pretty much the only ones.
I love the first power.
Okay, so on the assignment that I give for this in 6th and 7th grade, people tend to not read the directions and they do more work than they need to do. So I'm just going to run through to make sure you're reading the words and you know what they're asking for. So I have 2 to the 3rd. It says, what is the exponent? What am I going to write in the blank? 3. That's all they want. They don't need me to calculate it. If they're just asking for the exponent, that's my answer. There's an entire section on your worksheet where they just ask, what is the exponent? And you write that down. Okay, so to make sure you're reading, following those directions. What is the base? 2. The big number is the base. The little number is the exponent. And then if it says evaluate, that's when I actually do the math. So I'm going to take 2 times 2 times 2. So do not take 2 times 3. That's a big mistake lots of people make. You actually have to go through. 2 times 2 is 4. And then 4 times 2 is 8. And you might check these. Most of these we should be able to do in our heads, but you might check it with a calculator just to make sure, because it's a pretty common mistake for people to put 6. It's not 6 because there's no 3's in there. It's all 2's. Okay, so you could also have decimals and fractions. That's kind of a new thing when you get to 6th grade. So on this, what is the exponent? 3. What's the base? 0.2. So far, they're just asking me for vocabulary. That's it. And then if they want me to evaluate 0.2 to the 3rd, this is where I think the calculator really comes in handy, because you're going to take 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2. And when you have these decimals, that's when I think using parentheses to show multiplication is nice. We talked about that the other day, that you can use parentheses. But when you put it in the calculator, all you're going to do is 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2 equals, and we get 0.008. So the decimals, probably just going to use a calculator for that. You could do this longhand, take 0.2 times 0.2, then take that answer and multiply it times 0.2. It's just going to take a while. If you didn't have a calculator, you guys do know how to multiply decimals, but as we move up, we are going to use this as a tool. Can't hardly see that screen. There it is. All right, so on the next one, I have 1/2 to the 4th. What's the exponent? 4. What's the base? 1/2. And then when they ask me to evaluate this, I need to realize that it's 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. So we have to dig deep and think about, how do I multiply fractions? How do you multiply fractions? You could put it in your calculator with 0.5. So that is the way. We'll do that in a second. But what if I wasn't using a calculator? What if I'm just multiplying fractions? How do you multiply fractions?
Isn't it just
Straight across. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1
is 1.
is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. So I get 1/16. Now, what Ava suggested also works. So if you wanted to change it to a decimal, you could do 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5. It's just going to give you the answer in decimal form. Now, for what we're going to do on today's lesson, on today's assignment, if it's in fractions, I want the answer as a fraction. If they give it to you in decimals, I want the answer in decimals. So don't convert back and forth, because we need to practice both ways. And the reason why we can't always just do the decimal is in high school, they're going to give you things like x over y times x over y times x over y times z over x. And you're going to have to know what the rules are. When there's no numbers, and the calculator won't do it. So that's why we make you guys do some of these things. Sometimes it just seems like we're mean, but... Okay, so we're going to go backwards. They're giving us the expanded form here. We're going to write it as an exponent. So what is my base? What's the big number?
That is 3.
3. And then what's my exponent? Go for it. 6. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. So that makes it 3 to the 6th. So what is the exponent is 6. What is the base is 3. We just answered those questions. Now, did they ask me to evaluate anywhere on there?
No.
No, they just wanted me to write it like this. If they asked me, this would be a good calculator problem, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. We could do that.
You could.
We could, but it would take a while. Okay, so we're going to look at a pattern and talk about some special powers. So let's do the ones that we know. You guys tell me that you know what 2 to the 1st is. What is 2 to the 1st? It's just 2. You just have 1, 2 that you write down, and there's nothing to repeat. And then if I have 2 squared, that's 2 times 2, which is 4. And then 2 times 2 times 2, or 4 times 2, if you want to think about it that way, is 8. And then 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, we already did it a couple times today, is 16. So if I'm looking at this, I should be able to figure out the pattern and work backwards to see how do you do a 0 power. So I'm working backwards, and I go from 16 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to 2. So it's double if I go to the right. What is it if I go to the left? Divided by 2. So this one is going to be 2 divided by 2, which is 1. So any number raised to the 0 power is 1. That's a rule that you just memorize. It just is. And you could do this with any number. I could have 5 to the 1st and 5 to the 2nd, and you could do the same thing. And you would find out that 5 to the 0 is 1. 8 to the 0 is 1. 1.2 to the 0 is 1. So that's just a rule that we memorize. If it's to the 0 power, it's just 1. And then you guys have told me you already know this. Any number raised to the 1st power is itself. That's what I'm going to put in that blank. So 2 to the 1st power is just 2. 7 to the 1st power is 7. And 1/2 to the 1st power is 1/2. And in 8th grade, you get into negative powers, which do something completely different.